Michael.
Thank you, dear heart, and welcome everybody. Delighted and honored that you're here, and my apology for not taking calls today, but it seemed the feedback I got yesterday on our reading from the End of Suffering seemed to indicate that we probably need to do this as one piece. So I'm going to keep moving in order of the text. I'm going to offer an apology because as I was preparing for today's show, I started to get into editing some of what I'd written literally 20 years ago. And so in editing that, it has added some material, more material than I had intended to. Once it started, I kind of got on a roll, and it collided with some of the material that I had already written. And so it may be a little bit disjointed. And if so, I'll apologize. It's just part of the writing process. And so I'll apologize for that. And so we're back to the End of Suffering and the character that, if you're new to the show, it's written in a similar pattern to Why Is This Happening to Me Again, where I'm speaking to a character in the book and teaching him the tools. Only in this case, Yeshua is speaking to a character in the book and teaching him the deeper understanding of what he was about. So yesterday we finished with Yeshua offering an alternative understanding of what most of Christianity is interpreted as suffering. So he says, notice how I treated people. This is after his exiting the Garden of Gethsemane. He's fully connected to love. He tells Peter, you're Satan. You're trapped in Satan. You think in the mind of man rather than the plan of God. And with the high priest servant is standing there with his ear cut off, injured. And Yeshua, instead of dressing the high priest servant down for what this high priest servant's going to do to him, functions as a human being, demonstrates the power of active love, and brings healing to the man who's going to have him mercilessly slaughtered. Now, I've had people who've heard me offer that interpretation and say, well, Michael, that sounds pretty foolish. Did you notice that got him dead? And I say, absolutely. I noticed that functioning as a human being in that situation with that kind of violence got him dead. Did you notice they couldn't keep him that way? That's what he came to offer us. Function as a human being, and you can't be killed. If your being is not so locked into your non-being mind, and the source of your non-being mind, your body, is destroyed, then you will live again. You will continue to live as a human being. So Yeshua says to the character, notice how I treated people, even my enemies. And that is what doing the will of my Father entails. My victory over suffering and death was such a quantum leap beyond the world mind, the mind that kills us, that no one, including my own disciples, could even relate, let alone understand. What I did was so far beyond the beliefs of humanity steeped in suffering and death that it had to be diluted, obviously, even by the students I'd personally trained. How I'm about to unfold may sound like science fiction, but it is science fact. Lacking comprehension of my mission and the purpose of my work, suffice to say, no one understood what I accomplished that day. Character comes back with, my head reeled. Everything in me balked at these ideas. Do I dare engage in these thoughts? My breath evaporated as the statements transformed into questions in my mind. No one understood. Watered down. That can't be. I began to grasp that authorities who use fear and force are simply insecure in their knowledge and have lost contact with the presence of love that was their true state. I was astounded. I'd studied and listened to Yeshua's every word. I'd followed the directives of the Greek experts, the people who quote-unquote knew, had given. I thought, I've looked in all the right places, the church, the scriptures. I've read the writings of the best theologians I could identify. I knew more than I needed to know about dogma. It had been drummed into my head since childhood. I thought, why was I never offered this knowledge? Then I took for me what was an extremely difficult step. Though I was in shock, I began to admit for the first time that much of the dogma I believed and I had accepted because of fear and intimidation by those in charge, much of what I believed, his teachings were expressed fully in the Greek writings. I had never allowed myself a conflicting thought. I dared not clash with the scholars and preachers whose silent contempt and arrogance I bought into, and by so doing, I had forced the life out of any real questioning I might have engaged in. Just a few words directly from Yeshua. I started to develop the ability to see from his perspective. For the first time in my life, I allowed myself something that had been absolutely forbidden. I began to concede that somewhere inside me, I knew something was not right. An inner knowing I dared not acknowledge previously told me there were important pieces missing, and finally the light was dawning. I had always been confused by my own inability to live up to what I saw as Yeshua's example. Even more disconcerting were some of the actions of religious leaders I observed. They preached Yeshua's words of love, but counseled and did violence. I had watched their verbal violence toward children, and I wondered how they could recommend war. The hypocrisy, the guilt trips, the raging sermons, the hostility and fear had always shaken my core and seemed inconsistent with Yeshua's message of love. I began to trust in the wisdom I was born with, for intuitively, I always knew that life was about something different than all the hostility and fear of the world, preachers included. I could now see and was finally beginning to understand. In the past, I had indicted myself and the hypocrites for our sins. I was starting to see that we have all been born and bred into a world of hostility, punishment, and fear, and have therefore been unknowingly, quote unquote, conformed to this world. Suddenly, it was obvious that people did not choose the negative pathway. It was just the way of the world to take over and mold people's minds unless they were aware. What was needed was a space of love for healing, a space where, on a very practical level, we could be transformed by the renewing of our minds, and then to learn to live in this mind, which was also in Yeshua. I was beginning to grasp that he came to teach us to weaken fear, hostility, and its accompanying behaviors through forgiveness and love, thereby developing the ability to think and live out of the mind of love, which I now understand is literally the mind of God. It was though a bright light shone in a dark, dingy corner of my mind. So I asked him a question. So a person in error is in need of someone who can presence love, the mind of God? That just exploded out of my mouth in excitement. Yes, explained that the original idea of priesthood was to do exactly that. I came to bring tools that empowered people in the experience of love, not the theological wrangling that today passes as my work. It was a job of the priest to have done his or her own inner work to the point that, no matter what that priest faced, no matter what that other was going through, the priest could hold actively to the presence of love, literally the mind of Christ, and thereby facilitate healing, he explained. The world mind, the adversary, thinks it is being helpful when it judges and condemns. In its righteousness and pretense at knowing, it punishes and condemns, and by so doing adds error to error, dragging down the person it purports to correct. Recall I said, neither do I condemn thee. To say that the mind that does this has not done its own work, and is appropriately described by Paul when he says, therefore, thou art inexcusable, O man, whosoever thou art that judgest, for wherein thou judgest another, thou condemnest thyself. For thou that judgest doest the same things. Humankind is not in need of more judgments, especially from someone who thinks they represent me. For one who condemns is simply caught in an error corresponding to the error of the person they condemn. It's time for humanity to get to the truth. I came to deliver the tools for each individual to manifest literally the love of God in their lives and the lives of those who could not do it for themselves, whatever their error was. Clearly, I did not come to deliver reasons for war, separation, dogma, condemnation, and fault-finding. Reject me if you will. Remember I said, and if any man hear my words and believe not, I judge him not. For I came not to judge the world, but to save the world. And how many preachers can't wait till I come again, in their minds, to condemn and send to hell the ones they would like to send there. Read my lips. No judgment. I came to save the world mind from its own insanity, and it is carried on with all its old conflicts, family squabbles, wars, reasons for separation, religious condemnation, as though I had never spoken a word. The killing, psychological, emotional, and physical, is continued as if I demonstrated nothing. Now only it's done in my name. Your world is in danger of self-destruction, much of it over theological conflict and debate. It's time for the insanity done in the name of God, love, to end, and the work I demonstrated to actually be carried out. It is time for a suffering humanity to experience the active presence of the love of God. Whoever they are, whatever their form of suffering, condemnation, study, debate, and war will not bring healing, but the active presence of love will. My heart opened and tears began to flow, and I could feel years of old trauma melting away. In that same instant, without conscious prompting from me, my mind shifted into excitement. Could it be that after all those years of study, I'm beginning to really hear the truth? Here it is, my mind saying, my opportunity to ask directly. I was awestruck. Then, almost as quickly, my mind went into fear. With an abruptness that startled even me, I blurted out, "Oh, what about the church fathers? Certainly they understood." Pay attention to me. How do you expect to find the meaning of my teachings when you ignore my instructions and look for me where I am not? He captured my full attention. I spoke, taught, and thought in Aramaic, not Greek. Perhaps my input, the meanings I put forward, in the context in which I originally meant them, might be more valuable than all those thoughts of the Greek experts. Do you honestly think if my students did not grasp the depth of what I taught after 3 years of personal instructions from my own lips, that the Greek minds that have established your Western traditions had a chance of grasping what I alone understood and have been able to apply? Do you know that's produced the fruit that I did? $2,000 years ago, my message was beyond the comprehension of the world mind. It's time for my message to be understood. My sole desire for you is that you believe in me, believe me when I tell you that he that believeth in me, the works I do, so also shall he do, and greater works than these shall he do. And that's the end of chapter 1. Chapter 2 is entitled The Core Problem, being quote-unquote waxed gross, functioning from the unconscious. I started to grasp for the first time what he meant when he said, therefore I speak to them in parables, because they, seeing not, and hearing, they hear not, neither do they understand. And in them is fulfilled the prophecy of Isaiah, which said, by hearing you shall hear, and shall not understand, and seeing ye shall see, and shall not perceive. For this people's heart is waxed gross, and their ears are dull of hearing, and their eyes they have closed, lest at any time they should see with their eyes, and hear with their ears, and should understand with their heart. That was a powerful insight for me to gather. And then Yeshua stepped in and said, do you realize that your mind, because it substitutes perception sourced from within you for my words, limits your ability to hear my deeper meanings? Most people live in the world of perception that reflects and repeatedly plays out. Unresolved, hidden generational burdens they carry whenever they're triggered into activity. Burdens hidden require a place to be hidden. Your modern world calls this place this unnatural, dissociated part of the mind, the unconscious. It is referenced in Scripture as the heart. The accumulation of inharmonious energies have a powerful influence, not only on your physiology, but on your whole lives. You'll recall in Proverbs 4:23-25, when they warned, keep your heart with all diligence, for out of it spring the issues of life. Put away from you a deceitful mouth, and put perverse lips far behind you. Let your eyes look straight ahead, and your eyelids look right before you. What this means is that when we deny, and therefore hide from ourselves, inside of ourselves, the very issues we do not want to face, we create this unnatural condition. In your modern world, there's a brilliant psychiatrist named Carl Jung who discovered this principle and expressed it in these words: until the unconscious becomes conscious, it will direct our lives, and we will call it fate. A quote-unquote heart waxed gross, as Isaiah said it, is a hidden part of the mind filled with patterns of dissociated generational turmoil. That stored, unresolved fear, anger, rage, guilt, and condemnation skews everything that it thinks it sees, and blame is the byword, the lie by which it lives. And why is this happening to me again is its lament. Blame of others, circumstances, life, and even blame himself becomes the mindset that governs from the space of subtle energetic influences that end up directing our lives from this unconscious. The mind, waxed gross, actively resists producing a reality that reflects truth. It is trapped in an inability to produce a construct that accurately reflects what has been denied, hence is incapable of seeing its part, its responsibility for anything that happens to it. Denial is so rampant, people are so steeped in it, it has, for most, become so automatic that people have difficulty even comprehending and catching themselves in the act. The mind in denial calls continuously upon this quote-unquote waxed gross mental content to provide its guidance, literally forming the mind's realities. Trouble follows it wherever it goes because perceptions sourced from this hidden part of the mind are substituted for truth, and behaviors based on false perceptions always produce more of the same. The tools used to produce a result always produce a result like the tools. These false, repeating perceptual constructs, realities generated from the unconscious, are believed to be actual events in a person's life by the person perceiving them. Give me 1 second to make a note here. Called the mind of man, in them, delivers a construct out of the past from the body's carbon-based memory system into awareness. And that construct, perception, fills their senses and all the space they have for awareness. That construct is all they can perceive. They cannot see around their mind's realities to the actuality of the moment. Therefore, their minds are waxed gross. Said differently, a heart waxed gross, as Isaiah called it, is a mind hypnotized by its own internal messages. Its inability to hear stifled by the simple presence of hostility and or fear. A heart waxed gross can see life only through the lens of its own patterned brainwash. A person whose mind is waxed gross is one so imbued with the idea that their problems are external, that they are innocent victims, that their minds cannot even generate a reality that demonstrates awareness, that they're even involved in their own lives. They have become devout, card-carrying members of the outer-directed, one-world universal religion of blame. The blockage of truth is so deep, they cannot conceive of looking within for the root of their repeating problems. Parable in Aramaic is designed to go around a mind waxed gross in the world mind, to bypass the blocks in that mind. The solution lies in accessing directly and undoing, that is, forgiving, the big lie that all my problems are out there, and building the brain cells for functioning out of responsibility. Until the higher understanding of life that I'm presenting, until an awareness that matches or surpasses mine pervades it, the mind waxed gross is so full of mistaken beliefs about life that, like the average human being that has not done the requisite inner work, my light cannot penetrate it. Invite my light to penetrate your mind. touch the hem of my garment. Until then, you are only capable of understanding at the lowest levels because you're locked into the worldly definitions of my words. Don't expect to find the understanding I hold from my words in your culture's dictionaries. My meanings can only be written by one who has experienced the fullness of what I have to teach. Enmeshed in what it thinks it knows, the world mind cannot hear nor understand what I taught. Again, this is the state of being wax gross, and is why there have been so many atrocities committed by those who claim to be doing them in my name. To intimidate, incite fear, exalt suffering, judge, punish, and condemn to hell under the mantle of my name is a perversion of my work and my words by those who've not yet faced and cleaned out the aberrant content of their own minds. People who condemn are dealing with perception based in the waxed gross content within their own minds projected. Again, Paul spoke of this here in Romans 2:1 when he said, "Therefore thou art inexcusable, O man, whosoever thou judgest, for when thou judgest another, thou condemnest thyself, for thou that judgest doest the same things." In other words, if we stand in front of someone with unresolved pain and trauma within us, and that person is in a similar pain and trauma, if we live in denial, we'll take that very content from our own unconscious minds, our own hearts, put it into our brains image of them, and believe that they're the ones with the problem that's moving the pain inside of ourselves. My purpose, he says, was to teach and demonstrate the power of staying connected to love, your essential nature in each and every circumstance. This is what a true teacher of my work will experience, even in the most dire situation. Until you understand it can do that, it cannot be said in any way that you represent me. If there's anything in your life that you cannot stay connected to love in the presence of, anything you cannot hold a space of love for, don't kid yourself into thinking you know what I taught. For that ability is the very foundation upon which my teaching rests. You must even be prepared to hold that space, as I did, for your own death, for the Creator, for neighbor, which in my native Aramaic language means anybody you think about, and self is the first law. It is a mechanism for maintaining the true self. This is the protocol for understanding me, and the scriptures, a protocol which, when embodied, empowers you to fully comprehend and actually live out of my deepest teachings. Notice, I demonstrated how to express that protocol in very real terms the day of my crucifixion. When I said the second commandment of the law was, thou shalt have Rachma for thy neighbor as a method for maintaining self, I meant it. I taught that commandment not because it was a nice thing to do, but because it was a pathway to healing yourself and inoculating yourself against human insanity, of inoculating the mind of man in you against all dis-ease energies. I did not go through that experience to demonstrate the excellence of suffering, sacrifice, and death, but to illustrate the power of living a life as the active presence of love, our shared creative essence. That was my intended message. I said, connected to my essential nature, love, while I faced being tortured and killed. I could not wait to respond. The character says, I broke in. Yeah, and because you did not fight or escape when you had the chance, they killed you. Yeshua says, that is your mind waxed gross in its own fear. You don't get it yet. No, I did not fight or run. Yes, and because I did not fight or run, they quote unquote killed me. Then came my opportunity, the purpose I came to earth to fulfill. I demonstrated the power of love, the protocol I'm suggesting you live up to. And it is love that resurrected and healed my physiology. And it is the birthright of each of us to live connected to that love continuously. That was the only message I delivered throughout the entire course of my life, aside from instructions on how to achieve that state. Everything I taught was to reconnect humanity to that one source, quote unquote, the spirit of truth within. And anyone who hears and integrates that message will drop condemnation, fear, intimidation, and guilt, and heal themselves by simply forgiving and living out of the mind of love. I demonstrated the power of being connected to love, our essential nature, but without the eyes to see and the ears to hear, that was invisible to them. You must, however, if you genuinely wish to represent me, embody that message. If you're going to understand what I taught, the only thing to learn is how to stay in harmony with your created nature love instead of being run by your fabricated nature, the one rooted in hostility or fear, the unconscious or the part of the mind that is waxed gross. Love is life itself. It is the source of our real power as human beings. It was so powerful that it restructured my torn flesh and restored it to life. Be aware that insecure outer authorities trapped in the world mind and the dogma promoted by those who did not understand will want to make you to make me or themselves your source. But you must make contact with and learn to live out of your essential nature and your connection to that source, not mine. My words indicated once again how difficult it is for the mind to hold my instructions when you've been captured by the world mind and its imaginings. You must learn to manage your own mind and break off from being at the effect of the world. Here's another way in which I said it. I have yet many things to say to you, but you cannot bear them now. Howbeit that she, the Spirit of truth, when she comes, will guide you in all truth. The condition that will make that power active in you is the willingness to honor truth and love so much that you will hold to it regardless of circumstance. There are many who will do lip service, but that will not do. It must be a personal experience to be expressed. If fear or hostility enters your words or your mind, you have not yet mastered my message. I came to connect you with that spirit of truth in you, not some outer authority. In Aramaic, my words pointed to these understandings, different from those that fill the mind of one trained in the ways of the world. There is not room for my intended message in such a mind. That is why, unless they were ready to break free from the grip of the world mind, I chose the simple fisherman, the untrained, instead of the educated, to learn and teach my work. You recall how often and in how many ways I said, "Why do you not understand my speech? Even because you cannot hear my word." The mind structured in the ways of the world cannot accurately perceive the intended meaning of my words because it cannot see past its own content, cannot produce realities that do not match what it already thinks it knows, its waxed gross state, hypnotized by its own internal meanings. There is much to give up, much to make room for in the understanding of my work, to be able to perceive me truly and accomplish what I did, or even to hear me. By giving up, I do not mean sacrifice, but the release of the untrue, the misunderstandings, the hostilities, the fears, the behaviors in your life that only appear to work for you. You must disable the mind of fear in you. And you'll note that many purporting to follow me will tell you that fear is the beginning of wisdom. Fear is the beginning of foolishness. The giving up I speak of is not a giving up that means loss, but rather one that brings gain because it makes room for the blessings that truth brings. And it's not for the faint-hearted. You have to move from a culture that has a language about how you made me a certain way and turn that around into responsibility. Notice, there are those who promote victimhood as though it's a virtue and make it appear as though my work, my life, and my pathway to God were suffering and sacrifice. Nothing could be further from the truth. My pathway to the Creator was clearly love, but the world mind, glued to its woes, uses the idea that my crucifixion and death are about suffering and sacrifice to justify clinging to an ancient misperception of a punishing, wrathful God that could only be appeased by the blood of his own Son. The root of suffering is to accept, become an extension of the idea that ongoing pain, self or other inflicted suffering is good. We all have sorrows, but it is not healthy to carry it on. And I came to bring life more abundantly. You recall in John 16:33, I said, "These things I've spoken to you, that you may have peace. In the world you will have tribulation." The world, projected from a mind waxed gross, will always be based in trauma. But I have overcome that world, demonstrated the principle of truth, worlds apart from that. The truth that the world mind has not gained comprehension of in 2,000 years. I came not to demonstrate the excellence and benefits of suffering, but the protocol of living in a mind connected to love. I've been cast by the world mind as the king of victims, but never played such a role. I had no intention of making it look like suffering was my way to God. My message, interpreted through a cultural mindset of victimhood and fleshed out by those lost in their own unresolved pain, was turned inside out. Totally incorrect interpretation of what I intended. What I did wherever I saw suffering was to presence the love of God and thereby quickly dissolve and bring that suffering to an end. I created a space for forgiveness, removal to happen. I brought healing and came to teach you the same. I never said a word of praise for suffering. I did not allow suffering to carry on 1 second past people's willingness to heal. Careful in your scriptures and my meaning for the word suffer, you will see that I used it primarily to mean permit or allow, as in suffer the little children to come unto me and forbid them not. And there's been a whole theology built on a different interpretation. On the 2 occasions when I mentioned sacrifice, it was clear, I made clear, that that was not what the Creator wanted. Recall I said, but go ye and learn what that meaneth. I will have mercy and not sacrifice. How could someone think they were following me and build a dogma based in sacrifice? Only one waxed gross, trapped in the world mind and so focused on victimhood, they could not hear my words. I said in plain Aramaic, learn mercy and forget sacrifice. Yet they still wanted sacrifice, could only think in terms of sacrifice because they were enslaved to it. Their minds were waxed gross in it, and they could perceive nothing else. That was what filled their minds. That was all they had the ears to hear. Listen once again to what Isaiah said, being waxed gross would do to a man or woman. It means that hearing, ye shall hear and not understand, and seeing, you shall see and not perceive. Their ears are dull of hearing, lest at times they could see with their eyes and hear with their ears and should understand with their heart. Instead of trying to understand with a mind waxed or a heart waxed gross, to clean up the heart, to clean up the unconscious, means that we can finally understand from our hearts. Waxed gross is a state of being deaf and blind to even a simple truth. Simply stated, I said, no sacrifice, period. Now remember, the human mind can only think in terms of its own content. To change your mind's content so that it can consistently produce realities based in love, and a different reality for what happened the day of the crucifixion, requires inner work. I came to give humanity the tools with which to change its minds, the tools with which to do their work and see differently. Will you do the work, the inner work required to open and see with your eyes and hear with your ears and understand with your heart? Or will you remain waxed gross with fear and hostility, blaming everybody else for it? Rest assured that if you have suffering, fear, hostility, or any form of violence in your life, your heart is waxed gross, and you are not yet hearing my words. To understand with your heart is not an easy thing, for you must let go of your mind's misinterpretations long enough to grasp truth. You must be willing to be out of your mind. Communicating with Yeshua says, of course I want to, but how is such a thing achieved? Is it really possible in such an insane world as ours? The wars, the rumors of wars, the violence in our world causes fear in everyone, and we have to be tough and ready to fight for what's right. Yeshua says, that is your mind waxed gross in fear and violence. But this love stuff got you killed. Yes, but have you noticed they couldn't keep me that way? The insane world is not the cause of your hostility and fear, but the reverse is true. Your hostility and fear cause you to produce an insane world and see an insane world where in truth reason exists. I don't see the logic in that one, the character says to Yeshua. Yeshua replies, have you ever stood in front of someone and acted reasonable, sane, and even perhaps loving, and had them accuse you of all sorts of bizarre, off-the-wall things, and had your accuser go a little or a lot crazy? Then, to add insult and injury, they claim it was all your fault and that they were your innocent victim? Teresa says, well, actually, yes, all too often. So you stood in a loving, sane space, and they accused you of being the crazy one. Yes, been there, done that. So their hostility and fear caused them, with no provocation, at least no external provocation, to produce with their minds what looked like an insane world. Thinking that what is happening in one's own mind belongs to someone else is the true definition of insanity. And without engaging the tools to manage the output of the mind, one will remain insane no matter where they are in the echelons of power. The world mind, waxed gross, is filled with the belief that the heathen ritual of blood sacrifice was and is the key to life, and it's deaf to my instruction. How clearly does it have to be said? What has become a cornerstone of faith in me for many is an absolute direct opposition to my words. How blatant does the disregard for my teaching have to be before people wake up from the slumber induced by the fear implanted by those who would control them and did not understand? I said, but if you had known what this meaneth, I will have mercy and not sacrifice, you would not have condemned the guiltless. The interpreters of my words are all dead. I am alive. I said the things I do, you too can do. Do you think they heard me? Without the eyes to see and the ears to hear, who could see and hear the truth of my demonstration? I came into the world where suffering and victimhood was the norm, and purposely chose what appeared to be the worst affliction available to show that I could not be touched by it. When Peter tried to interfere, I told him he was Satan, and I explained what I meant by that. Peter, for you think in the mind of man rather than the plan of God. Peter's mind was stuck in that place of being waxed gross, and he lashed out and tried to destroy. The world mind misinterprets my message. Focused on suffering, it is incapable of living out of the protocol I said was necessary. There are those who will say that Greek is the original language of the Scriptures. If that is true, why do even the Greek scholars admit that Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani was left in the original Aramaic? Why have my Aramaic roots been covered up? Who stands to benefit? Do you have any idea what I actually said? Or better yet, what I actually meant? Greek renditions of my life and teachings have portrayed aspects of the crucifixion of my life totally and accurately, and most of the fine points of my teaching have been clouded and hidden, placed in the key words I said on the cross. My thoughts were displaced in Greek translations by ideas that never entered my mind. My thoughts displaced in those minds that were waxed gross. I said nothing during the crucifixion that portrays suffering. And Christ said, "Behold, I make all things new." I certainly did not speak of being forsaken by our Creator. I developed and refined a form of forgiveness designed to free people from suffering. I taught, practiced, and demonstrated the effectiveness of that tool. But a backward interpretation of the crucifixion turned my mission upside down. Make room in your mind. Learn how to collapse that mind in you that is waxed gross, and that's the purpose of forgiveness. And my words will show up in their original content, as their original content, in their original context. And you'll begin to see what I did and its potential meaning for humanity. So locked into victimhood that it seems like the only way, in fact, a desirable way to live. Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani was my statement of thanksgiving and an expression of my excitement at the insight I gained through what appeared to others to be the last days of my life. Well, what did those words mean? I'm not even sure how to pronounce it. Eli. What did they mean? If I told you, do you think you'd have the eyes to hear it? To think you're developed enough spiritually to actually make sense of why I would be in celebration while hanging on a cross? It's time to rethink everything you think you know about me, because to a great degree you've been taught an inferior, heathen philosophical system in place of my instructions, which are only meaningful when understood in their own context. I came to put an end to suffering, not to promote it as a pathway to the Creator. I intended to show that suffering has no effect on those who freed themselves from victimhood. I demonstrated that life delivers circumstances that make it look like suffering is the only option, but instead of suffering, I stood as the presence of love in the presence of my so-called enemies. In your world of hostility, national, interpersonal war, and religious prejudice, who was ready? Who had the ears to hear that instruction? I established through demonstration what was possible for every human being. And it's an idea that most people even have trouble bringing into their own homes. Their minds are so waxed gross. Each experience that seems to demand suffering is nothing more than an opportunity to free ourselves from the burden of that particular form of suffering, which comes from our own minds, and the tool for gaining that freedom is forgiveness. I did not suffer because I healed my mind's ability to inflict suffering upon myself. Yes, in the Garden of Gethsemane, I sweat blood, and that was the physiological release that had to happen as I cleansed my own instrument. In any experience that seems painful, you must forgive. That is, remove that particular aspect of suffering from your body's mind, and therefore end the possibility of experiencing that form of suffering again. The world mind, trapped in its own stresses because of a lack of love, believes everyone else is to blame for the conditions in which it finds itself and the realities it experiences. Wanting to appear religious, it then counsels forgiveness, but substitutes the idea of pardoning in place of what I taught about forgiveness. It piously suggests you let others off the hook for your suffering, inflicted suffering on self. This so-called forgiveness does nothing to change the source of the suffering which is within. I counsel from your hearts. Forgive, This was not a bleeding heart statement, not a sentimental, nice guy, let them off the hook directive, as has been interpreted. The word heart in my native Aramaic is the equivalent, once again, of your word unconscious. I was saying, in effect, you must own your own pain, though you've blamed another for it. Your pain comes out of what you've denied and suppressed in yourself, and while your brother triggers those energies in you. And what you're feeling is your own, and you must remove it from the depths of your unconscious, your heart, from your heart waxed gross. Those wrongs that you think belong to your brother. Humanity has spent centuries misunderstanding this most important principle and misusing forgiveness. Instead of each doing his or her own inner work, and thereby debilitating the mind's ability to even produce suffering in any form, most turn their attention on everyone else's mistakes, as if their pain would go away if others would only change. Once again, my instructions have been ignored. I said, why beholdest thou the mote that is in thy brother's eye, and perceivest not the beam that is in thine own? Why do you live in blockage to truth? If you actually practice forgiveness as I taught it, use the tool as I presented it, it will change the painful realities in your mind, and the result will be a life of serenity, the life I taught was possible. Truly, you will be able to say with me, I am not of this world. And thank you for joining us today. Much appreciation. I hope this has been meaningful. And if you need a repeat of it, it will be available as a replay in our archives. And soon Jeannie will have both days of reading in our YouTube channel you listen to. So thanks for joining us. Get the best year of your eternal life. It's an awesome